Same thing. Another one of my grandpa's short stories. Um, this one I have here is called the Misty Grove. Yeah. Yeah, we can go to bed after if you want. Yeah. Do you want to get like a snack or some goldfish or something? Okay. Yeah. I'll wait. Oh, jeez, how long is this thing? Okay. Goldfish, nice. Okay. Alright, so the name of this story is called The Misty Grove. Harrison had never felt at home in the sleepy village nestled within the mist-shrouded forest. Growing up in a small community of Thornwood, he had always been an outsider. It wasn't that the people weren't kind. It was more than that. They just seemed to exist in a rhythm he could never quite match. The townsfolk, from the blacksmiths to the butchers to the weavers, all seemed to know their place within the intricately woven fabric of Thornwood. But Harrison felt like a loose thread, constantly fraying at the edges, never fully part of the whole. The village was tucked away in the heart of the mystical forest, the kind of place that seemed more like something from a fairy tale than reality. Towering trees with bark that shimmered in the early morning mist, streams that sang as they flowed, and animals were far more curious than their forest-dwelling cousins in other places. For most of the villagers, Thornwood was home, but for Harrison it was simply where he existed. The forest was alive with strange sounds, the chirp of unseen bird, the rustling of leaves that never seemed to fall, the distant echo of a bell that could ring only on foggy days. Harrison often wandered the edge of the village, where the forest grew dense and thick, contemplating why he had never quite fit in. His family was warm, if not a bit overbearing. His mother, with her bright eyes and humming voice, would call him from their small cabin every night to eat supper. His father, a stern yet loving man who worked the forge, would offer him advice that never seemed to land. Let's see how I can kind of fold these over. Yeah, I mean, it was easier for him to kind of just print them off like this. So I don't really have a book here. Just gonna see, maybe I'll give it a fold. Like that. People are strange, aren't they? Harrison muttered to himself as he walked through the thick underbrush. He was in one of his moods again, feeling the weight of being different. As he passed the ironsmith's shop, he could hear the rhythmic clang of metal against metal, a sound that had always been comforting to him in its predictability, but today it felt far more distant. "You're off again," his father had said that morning when Harrison tried to express his frustration. "You know the people here care about you, Harrison, the way you think. Sometimes it's like you're looking for something that doesn't exist." The words had stung, though he knew his father didn't mean them harshly, but Harrison couldn't help feeling as if he were always chasing an illusion, an idea of connection that the rest of the village seemed to possess effortlessly. His friends, who seemed to find joy in the simplest things like fishing in the creek or gathering herbs in the woods, would greet him with wide smiles, but Harrison could never shake the feeling of being on the outside looking in. That afternoon, As Harrison ventured deeper into the forest, the fog thickened, swirling around the trees like a blanket. The air was cooler now, and the forest smelled of damp earth and pine. It was on the days like this, when the world seemed to soften and blend together, that he often found solace. The fog had found a way of muffling the world, making it feel as though the past and future didn't matter. It was just him and the forest, wrapped quietly in a mystery. He walked past the old willow tree, its branches dipping low to the ground, like a curtain between him and the world. It was a landmark in Thornwood, one that had witnessed countless generations come and go. Harrison often stopped here, running his fingers along the bark, feeling the coolness of the tree's ancient age. But today, something was different. As his fingers brushed against the bark, he felt a sudden, strange sensation, a ripple of energy that seemed to pass from the tree into him. It wasn't painful, but it was unexpected, and it left him feeling oddly lightheaded. For a moment, he stood frozen, unsure of what he'd just experienced. He glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the tree, but there was no one. The fog was thick now, almost impenetrable. The air shifted, and Harrison found himself moving without thought, his feet leading him toward a small, hidden path he had never noticed before. The path was barely wide enough for a single person to pass, winding through a dense thicket of moss-covered stones and low-hanging vines. The forest seemed to close in around him as he stepped onto the path, the fog curling around his ankles like 1,000 whispers. Curiosity, which had always been his greatest companion, urged him forward. He followed the trail deeper into the woods, feeling an odd sense of excitement building in his chest. The further he walked, the more the forest seemed to come alive, the whispers of the trees growing louder, the flicker of movement in the periphery of his vision more pronounced. He hadn't realized how far he'd gone until the path opened up into a small clearing, and in the center of that clearing stood something that took his breath away. A cabin, but not like any cabin Harrison had ever seen before. The structure appeared to be made of stone, with ivy creeping up the sides and moss growing thick around the base. The roof was thatched with golden straw, and the windows glowed with a warm, welcoming light. But what struck Harrison the most was the air of timelessness surrounding it, as if it had always been there, hidden in plain sight. For a moment, Harrison hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but something in the air, the hum of energy that seemed to pulse around the cabin, compelled him to move closer. As he reached inside the door, it creaked open on its own, as if welcoming him inside. The interior was warm, with a fire crackling in a hearth at the far side of the room. There were shelves lined with screens, trinkets, and books, the air thick with the scent of herbs and wood smoke. But what caught his attention most were the people. They were sitting around a table, chatting quietly. There were no strangers here, only a sense of belonging. "Ah, Harrison," said an elderly woman with silver hair and a knowing smile. "We've been waiting for you." He blinked, confused. "Waiting for me?" She nodded, her eyes twinkling. "You've always been a part of this place, even if you haven't realized it yet." Before he could respond, the room seemed to shimmer, and suddenly, the world outside seemed far away. The forest, the village, everything felt distant, and Harrison was left with only the feeling of warmth and belonging that the cabin exuded. "Come," the woman said, her voice gentle. "It's time to see Thornwood for what it truly is." As Harrison stepped forward, a realization settled in his chest. Maybe the key to his connection with Thornwood wasn't about finding a place to belong, but rather about seeing it with new eyes. And with that, the adventure he didn't know he needed began. So that's kind of the first part of the story. I guess he split it into two. Hold on, I'm gonna take a drink. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's just some chapstick. Oh. Yeah, dry winter air is getting my lips real chapped. You want any? No? Okay. Okay. Now part two, the heart of Thornwood. Harrison followed the elderly woman through the cabin, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. The fire crackled behind them, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and the soft murmur of the others around the table faded into the background. They passed through a narrow hallway lined with strange symbols carved into the wooden beams. At the end of the hall, the woman led him to a small room, its only furniture an ancient, weathered chair positioned in front of a large window. Sit, she instructed gently. Harrison hesitated but obeyed, lowering himself into the chair. The moment he settled, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as though the entire room, the cabin, and the forest beyond were waiting. Waiting for what? He wasn't sure. The woman stood beside him, her expression serene but expectant. You feel it, don't you? She asked. Harrison nodded slowly, unsure of how to explain the sudden weightlessness he felt, as though he were no longer bound by the world outside. The air was thick with energy, and he could almost taste the vibrancy in the atmosphere, a kind of hum that resonated deep within him. Thornwood is more than a village, she continued, her voice like a soft melody. It's a living thing, a community that thrives on connection between the people, between the land, and yes, between the unseen forces that guide us. But Harrison struggled to find the words. I've never felt connected. I've always felt apart from everyone here. The woman's eyes softened. That's the first step, you know. The feeling of being apart. It's not a sign of rejection, but of something much deeper. The village is woven together, but you've been looking at it from the outside, expecting it to change to fit you, but perhaps you need to change how you see it. Harrison furrowed his brow, unsure what she meant. How do I change how I see it? The woman smiled, then gestured towards the window. As he looked out, Harrison's breath caught in his throat. The fog had parted slightly, revealing Thornwood in a way he had never seen before. The village, with its modest cabins and bustling shops, seemed alive, pulsing with energy. The people were not going through the motions of their daily lives, as he had always believed. There was a deeper connection between them, one that existed in the way that they moved, the way that they spoke, the way they worked together. A blacksmith hammered at his forge with a rhythm that seemed to flow through the entire village. The butcher and the baker exchanged knowing glances as they passed by each other's shops, a silent communication that was far more than just a friendly greeting. The children played together in the streets, their laughter weaving through the air like music. It was as if the village itself had a heartbeat, and Harrison could now hear it. The land here, the woman said, is rich with history. It was always a place of balance, a sanctuary for those who chose to see it. You felt is connected because you've been looking at the surface, but there's something deeper, something that binds us all. But how? Harrison asked, his voice tinged with frustration. I don't know how to feel what you're talking about. I don't know how to be part of it. about letting go of your expectations and opening yourself up to the connections that are already there. She stepped closer to him, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. You are already part of this village. You have always been. It's time to let go of the belief that you're separate. The mist, the forest, the people. They've been waiting for you to see it. Harrison stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him like a cloak. It felt impossible. How could he have been so blind all this time? The village had always been there, always alive with connection, and he had been the one holding himself apart. It wasn't the village that needed to change, it was him. Come, the woman said softly, offering her hand. He took it, standing up and following her out of the room. The cabin seemed to shimmer around him as they passed through it, the walls now feeling less like a structure and more like an extension of the forest itself. They made their way to the door, and the moment they stepped outside, the forest greeted Harrison in a way it had never before. The air was cooler, but no longer felt isolating and felt like a companion breathing alongside him. The village was just ahead, but it felt different now, more real, more alive. We'll start small, the woman said. There are people who will show you the way. As they walked towards the heart of Thornwood, Harrison's gaze drifted over the familiar faces. There was old Mr. Alden, the carpenter working on a new set of chairs outside his shop, and Sarah, the young weaver, humming a tune as she threaded her loom. The familiar sights no longer felt distant. They felt like pieces of a puzzle, each one fitting into place. Harrison's mind buzzed with 1,000 questions, but the woman's calm presence seemed to quiet his racing thoughts. Don't worry about the answers just yet, she said. Sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. They passed through the square and Harrison saw the butcher's shop with its familiar red and white striped awning. The butcher, a burly man with a thick beard, caught sight of them and gave a nod of acknowledgement. Harrison instinctively returned the gesture, but then something remarkable happened. The butcher smiled genuinely and waved. It wasn't a forced or obligatory gesture, but a true expression of connection. And in that moment, Harrison realized that he had never truly seen these people before. They weren't just individuals passing through the same space. They were a part of him just as he was a part of them. You see, the woman asked, her voice warm. It's all around you, the connections, the love. It was never about you fitting in, Harrison. It was about you allowing yourself to be part of something greater. Harrison stood there, a smile slowly spreading across his face as he took in the village, the people, and the forest surrounding them all. It was his perspective that had kept him distant, but now, with a heart open and free, he could finally see Thornwood for what it truly was, a place where everyone belonged, where every connection mattered, and where he, too, was an essential part of the tapestry. The fog began to lift, and as the sun pierced through the mist, Harrison understood the truth. He had been home all along. That's it. Yeah. I like that one. Yeah. It's it kinda reminds me a little bit of, what's that one called? The one with, Scrooge. Is that A Night Before Christmas? I'm not sure if that's right, but you know the one I'm talking about. Yeah, where they kind of like take him. I mean, they're not dealing with going into the past or the future or whatever, but just kind of how he had almost like a spiritual guidance, kind of somebody taking him through and making him change his perspective. Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that one. Oh. Yeah, I got a little bit of a sniffle. Oh. in a second. Yeah, we can just brush our teeth and go to bed. Okay.